Hi guys, welcome back to yet another fun DIY sailboat refit video here aboard good old Athena. My plan for this week was to get the mast serviced, rewired and fit all of the new electronics, but I have encountered a small problem here inside of the mast. Athena has in-mast furling, and that's why there's this profile here inside of the mast. The sail slots into that, and then depending on the rotation of that profile, the sail either gets pulled in or out of the mast. Furling or unfurling the sail is done by rotating this thing. If we open this, you should be able to see the issue. If you look at where the aluminum profile attaches to the stainless bit here, you can see that it's badly corroded. And at some point, somebody turned this profile a quarter turn because these holes were probably too corroded. That, to me, looks like a somewhat horrible attempt at a repair that's not gonna last long term. And I think I can do better. But to do that, I need to pull apart the entire mast. If you're new to my channel, I have spent the last 4 years refitting Athena, including rebuilding the entire deck, building a new rudder using vacuum infusion, gutting most of the interior to make some structural repairs, and then subsequently rebuilding most of the interior. All of that is documented right here on YouTube, and I publish a new video every Sunday. In the summer of 2021, my fiancée Ava and I are gonna move aboard and start cruising full time, and well, then we'll figure out if I've done a good job on all of my repairs. Last week, I got Athena's D240F fired up for the first time in 4 years. I then proceeded to soak the freshwater side of the cooling system in vinegar. I used regular distilled vinegar, and that's been in there for a couple of days, so it's time to drain it. There's a drain plug right here, and there's also one on the other side of the engine right underneath the heat exchanger. In an attempt to avoid making the entire boat smell like vinegar, I've got a little piece of fuel hose that I can connect. The other end of the hose is inserted into one of the empty vinegar bottles. And there we go. The vinegar is slowly draining. Looking at the color of this stuff, there must have been a little bit of the old coolant left inside of the engine. I thought I had flushed it, but it can only have been a little bit because I used almost all the vinegar I ordered. The purpose of the vinegar was to attempt to knock loose any scaling or rust inside of the cooling system. And as you can see, there is a little something floating around down here. All of the vinegar-infused coolant has now been drained. The next step is to flush the freshwater side of the cooling system thoroughly with tap water. I've flushed the coolant system multiple times with tap water. The final flush is going to be with demineralized water. I'm in the middle of draining the last bit of the demineralized water. The gunk you see down there is all stuff that came out of the engine from flushing it. Another reason for flushing the coolant system is because I'm going to be changing coolant. I'm going to switch to this ELC stuff. A guy that's a lot smarter than I am recommended I use this ELC stuff to maximize the lifespan of the engine. Let me see if I can get this right. Apparently the nitrate additives in the ELC coolant will form a microscopic film inside of the cast iron water passages of the engine, converting soft ferric oxide or rust into a ferrosulfuric oxide, which is harder, which will limit corrosion and also cavitation damage due to the cylinder walls flexing. If it sounded like that sentence ended in a little bit of a question mark, well, you were spot on, because I'm not going to claim that I fully understand this, but apparently ELC coolant is the bee's knees. This is the concentrated version, not the pre-mixed version. So I'm going to have to thin this down 60 to 40. I chose the concentrated version because we're going to be carrying a few jugs of this stuff aboard Athena, and I figured no matter where in the world we go, we're always going to be able to find demineralized water, or in an emergency, just regular old tap water. If nothing else, this stuff looks absolutely delicious, but it's probably best not to drink it. It looks like this is going to be 45% coolant and 55% demineralized water. I'm going to need a little bit more coolant than the 5 liters I've got here, around 6.4 liters in total, but I might not be able to add all of it until I've run the engine for just a little bit. With the coolant replenished, the very last thing I need to do before the engine is 100% ready to get Athena back in the water is to connect the raw water inlet. But to do that, I'm going to have to do a little bit of prep work, and I'm going to do that off camera. It's been a busy couple of days. I've gotten a bunch of different stuff knocked off of my to-do list, like for instance installing the swim ladder. I'll need that to be able to get on the boat once she goes back in the water. I've also installed the drains for the seating in the cockpit, the through hull for the manual bilge pump, and this is what I needed to be able to finish the engine installation, a painted piece of plywood for mounting the raw water strainer. While I was painting that piece of plywood, I also painted the inside of the settee and the aft end of the technical compartment, because in that end of the technical compartment I'm going to be mounting the diesel heater, and I also made this little bracket doodad here for mounting said heater. I've also already started disassembling the mast, as you might be able to see way back there in the background. I held in place the aluminum profile while turning the reefing winch to loosen the tension screw. To get the masthead removed from the mast, I undid the 4 bolts. After that, I was able to remove the aluminum profile. With the aluminum profile removed, we can get a really good look at the horror that's going on here, which this certainly doesn't look super awesome. I've never taken the mast apart before, so this is all new to me, but it is a little bit worrying the amount of play there is in this swivel. That looks suspicious. But I am dodging rain showers here, so let's see if I can take this off of the aluminum profile and also the swivel. At the top of this 14-meter long aluminum profile, there's another swivel doohickey that seems like it might be worth cleaning. It looks like this thing is also riveted in place, so let's just leave it for now and see if I can clean it in place a little bit later. This thing is really crusty. There's a bunch of dog hair here and a lot of old grease. Let's see if this will come apart. A little bit of brake cleaner fluid should hopefully get rid of this extremely tacky grease. So far, so good. There was nothing alarming inside of this guy, so just a thorough cleaning and a bit of fresh grease and he should be good to go. There is still the small matter of this corroded mess down here. I think my best option is to cut away the bad part down here and then make some kind of extension to this guy here. It looks like it's about to start raining any second again, so before that happens I'd like to remove the furling winch here and the gear assembly that's hiding in behind here. Feast your eyes on this. The gear now runs super smooth. Before I put the gear back in place, I'm just gonna ever so gently clean the threads on the fasteners. Over here is the before and this is the after. Let's get this thing shoved back inside the mast. Getting the gear lined up is proving to be a little bit of a fiddly process. Before securing the fasteners, I'm just going to use a little bit of Duralac. The gear is now good as new. I don't know how often you're supposed to service these, but I am pretty sure the previous owner never touched it. In terms of servicing the mast, the only thing that's left is this top swivelly bit here. I never figured out how to take this apart, so I've just run a bunch of brake cleaner fluid through it until the stuff that comes out runs nice and clear. Sure, I could attempt to drill out those 4 rivets to remove the doohickey, but I'm pretty sure I can't get a replacement, so I don't want to risk it. The very last thing that's left in terms of servicing the mast is to make the little adapter or extension doohickey that's going to go onto this so that I can remove a little bit of that aluminum profile inside of the mast. We've got this little piece of shaft left over. This is 316 Ti, meaning it's stainless with just a sprinkle of titanium. The plan is to use Mr. Lathe to turn this doohickey into the extender / adapter, but I've only ever used Mr. Lathe for softer materials such as Delrin and some softer metals, so I'm going to hold off on getting started on this until I can get Martin to just supervise the process a little bit. Servicing the mast is almost done. I'm going to hold off until next week to rewire the mast and install all of the electronics because we're going to get a ton of rain this week. But I might be able to close the reconnect the D240 task as well as the new prop task. But let's start with the D240. You might recognize this painted piece of plywood from a little earlier in the video. As you can see, I've gone ahead and mounted the raw water strainer. On the side of the sail drive, there are a bunch of small holes. Those are for the raw water inlet. But it's very common around here for those holes to clog with seaweed, so I'm gonna need a secondary raw water inlet, something I can switch to in case those little holes clog. So below the seawater strainer, I'm gonna be fitting this little 3-way connector. After copious amounts of fiddling about and a near mortal injury, the raw water strainer is now in place. Here's that 3-way connector. This side connects to the inlet in the sail drive, and this side connects to a through hole that's near the bilge. And then both of those connect up to the raw water strainer. And yes, that is a drop of blood because apparently hose clamps are dangerous. I'm gonna see if I can get some of those little red plastic doohickeys to put on the hose clamps to avoid any future issues. And that means I can go ahead and close the reconnect the D240 task. At some point in the future, I would like to just tidy up the hose and cable management in there, but that's not crucial to getting Athena back in the water. Let's move on to the new prop task. This is the old prop, and when I mentioned that I was going to replace it, I got a few comments asking, how can a prop be worn out? Well, if you look here inside of it, there's a spline in here. It's hard to catch on camera, but the spline in here is pretty worn. And also the rest of the prop is starting to look a little bit corroded. Now this is a fixed blade aluminum prop. I would of course much rather have a super spiffy folding prop, like for instance a max prop. But for now, a new fixed blade aluminum prop is just gonna have to do. Truth be told, I have already spent a bit of time fiddling with the prop this week, and I've spent a bit of time talking to Volvo too. On the old prop, there was this cone-shaped aluminum doohickey, and apparently that has now been changed to a plastic doohickey that's basically identical. There's also been some changes to the design of the prop. Notice how this spline here is kind of recessed into the prop a little bit. Well, here it's proud of the surface, and there's also some machining that's been done to this that's not been done to this prop. On the old prop, the coney doohickey here sat nice and flush with the surface, no gap here. On the new prop, because this is proud of the surface, there is very much a gap between this and the prop. There's also this little plastic washer doodad that goes on here, which seems very odd. It just kind of sits there and doesn't really do anything. I've talked to the local Volvo pusher a couple of times this week to figure out if this gap here is really supposed to be there. It just kind of looks weird to me. And also when this prop is mounted, there's a small gap between the prop and the sink on the sail drive. Volvo sent me an exploded diagram with, well, all the parts I've got. So I'm just gonna assume that this is correct, although to me it looks kind of odd. As you can see, there's a gap back here. If I replace the sink, that gap might become a little bit smaller, but there's certainly a gap. And there's also the gap here, and that weird washer is just kind of flapping around in the breeze. So yeah. As you can see, there's not a lot to this. Now on this drawing, they are missing a spacer that's supposed to be there. It's on my sail drive, and it's also on the exploded diagram. Other than that, it's just a bit of grease on with the prop, on with the cone thing, and there's a nut and a little lock doodad. Worst comes to worst, and it turns out that I've got some kind of weird mixed up situation with the wrong part here. I can always swap out the prop with the boat in the water, so it's not the end of the world if this turns out to be wrong for some reason. There's this little lock doodad thingy. I think this is supposed to go on like this. And then in the instructions, it looks like you're supposed to fold this little guy and this little guy up so that it locks the bolt in position. Mechanically, I think this is sound. It feels solid, and I can't see any kind of mechanical issue with this. It's just this gap. It seems weird. I'm going to assume that the prop installation is perfectly fine and that it's just me being silly obsessing over that little gap. So we can go ahead and close that task too. Things are looking good. I'm supposed to get the new chain plates hopefully by the end of next week. The new standing rigging should also show up next week. I've already got everything I need to rewire the mast. I just wanted to stop raining for a couple of days. And yeah, then all that's left is activating the cover coat. Last night, Martin helped me make this, the Mast Saver 2000. This is going to solve that little corrosion issue on the profile inside of the mast. I cut off the corroded tip of the aluminum profile and well, as you can see, it's looking pretty beat up. This is of course exactly what happens when you combine stainless and aluminum. The Mast Saver 2000 is made out of stainless steel, but there is a Delrin bushing inside of it that's going to insulate the aluminum profile from the stainless. This piece down here is what came with the mast. This is where the tension screw screws into, and we simply just welded that to a little piece of the stainless steel shaft I showed you earlier. Using Mr. Lathe, we removed a bunch of material to make room for the Delrin bushing. The plan is to slide the Mast Saver 2000 onto the aluminum profile and then through bolt it with 2 or 3 bolts. When securing things to an aluminum mast, it's very common to use Monel rivets. It's a type of metal that doesn't cause the corrosion issue stainless does, yet it doesn't rust. And I want to see if I can find some Monel bolts to through bolt this with, because that way I am guaranteed I will not have any kind of corrosion issues with this. I'm not entirely sure where I can purchase those Monel nuts and bolts, but if you guys know of a place, please go ahead and leave a comment down below. It may seem a little bit excessive to care this much about the Mast Saver 2000 and that aluminum profile inside of the mast, but that is because, at least in my opinion, Selden, the manufacturer of the mast, is not really great at providing spare parts for older parts, and the mast aboard Athena is over 30 years old, so I'm pretty sure if something breaks, well, then I can't just replace that part. I'm either going to have to make a new part or get a brand new mast, and those are ridiculously expensive. And that's why I think it makes a lot of sense to go the extra mile with something like the Mast Saver 2000. If it hadn't been raining more or less non-stop this week, I would have been able to install all of these spiffy electronics on the mast and also gotten the mast rewired. But the good news is, next week is looking really good for dry weather. The last 2 pieces of the mast puzzle arrived this week. That is the very last light I was waiting for, and also a new radar mount for the new Garmin radar. I know I ended last week's video saying basically the exact same thing, but next week it's looking very promising for getting all of the electronics installed on the mast. So yeah, and on that hopeful note, I am going to end this week's video. As always, feel free to leave a comment down below, and don't forget, if you've enjoyed this video, remember to leave a like. See you!